We've been focusing on the hips this month, and today we'll focus on the adductors, abductors, and a few poses that require us to find balance amongst our muscles. The hip adductors you probably know are often called the groins. Some of the abductors, as we briefly discussed in another video, also act as medial rotators, which is important to keep in mind. Let's start by examining one of the most basic poses, Sukhasana, or easy pose. We might sit on a blanket or block to find length in our spine, or we may simply sit on the mat. Once we are seated and begin to come into the pose, the lateral rotators and hip abductors shorten in concentric contractions, while the hip adductors, which are gracilis, pectineus, adductor magnus, adductor longus, and adductor brevis, begin to lengthen in eccentric contractions. But if the adductors are very tight, you may need blocks or blankets underneath your knees to allow the muscles to begin to engage and relax accordingly. Another important thing to remember here is that everyone's pelvis is not anatomically identical. Someone may have ample lateral rotation in their hips, while another person is just not built that way. When we bring our feet together in bound angle pose, we may feel more stretching in the hip adductors because of the position change from Sukhasana, which makes sense, but also plays a role in why we structure and plan classes the way we do. Nobody wants to pull a muscle, and by arranging the poses in such a way that we are gently waking up the muscles we will later engage and or lengthen at our peak pose, we are providing our bodies with preparation instead of just jumping into things cold. When we stand on one leg, as people often do, we can accidentally compress our hip joint on that side. Look around the room next time you are somewhere with a lot of people and see how many people stand predominantly on one leg more than the other. As a little side note here, reclined extended hand to big toe pose is really helpful for people that do this. Kind of helps even those hips out a little bit. I really like that pose. It's a favorite of mine because I tend to stand on one leg sometimes. Things like this, and things we do every day without even thinking about them, or maybe positions we sleep in without even realizing it, impact how our bodies move through our yoga practices. And that's why some people have a much easier time with certain poses during certain times of their life, and maybe a more difficult time during other times of their life, because everything is connected. We come into our yoga practices as people who live lives outside of the studio. So we need to be considerate of ourselves, of our bodies, and be grateful for all we have.